It all started in 1999, when I was 19 years old, sitting in my tiny, rain-soaked apartment in the Pacific Northwest, staring at the phone with trembling hands. For 7 long years, I had carried a secret torch for a boy I'd met back in junior high. We'll call him Dean. Or more accurately, douche nozzle. You'll see why later. After ending a 5-year relationship with my high school boyfriend, I decided it was time to finally rip off the Band-Aid. I told myself if Dean rejects me, then I can finally let this go and move forward with my life. I dialed his number, fully expecting awkward silence or a polite but firm "sorry, I don't see you that way." Instead, when my shaky voice confessed that I had been holding this candle for him all these years, Dean didn't laugh. He didn't shut me down. His voice softened, and he said the words I had dreamed of hearing since I was 12. Asterisk, I always had a thing for you. I just didn't know how to tell you. I was scared if I tried, you'd reject me, and I'd lose you forever. Asterisk. My heart nearly gave out. This boy, the one I had kissed once during junior high and never dared to chase, was suddenly confessing that he felt the same. His words poured out like poetry, everything I had wanted him to admit years earlier. Suddenly, my vow that I would never, ever return to Alaska lost its meaning. That word, never, clenched so tightly in my life, suddenly seemed flexible. If I could finally have the love I had wanted all these years, why couldn't I change my mind about moving back? Within weeks, I was flying back and forth to Alaska on buddy passes, seeing him every couple of weekends. And soon enough, everyone in our old circle was thrilled. They gushed over us, saying things like asterisk, finally, you two are perfect for each other. Our dream couple. Asterisk, it was cheesy, but it felt validating. It felt like fate itself was giving me a nod. Months later, on one of those visits, Dean proposed to me. No hesitation, no fear in his eyes, just pure promise. I said yes. Of course I did. And I threw myself into packing up my life. I boxed every belonging I had into parcels and shipped them to his place in Anchorage, ready to step into this new chapter one had longed for. He lived with a roommate, a guy nicknamed Bicycle Man, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally going to be with the man of my dreams, building the future we had both secretly wanted for all those years. But just days before my final flight north, something in my body felt off. My stomach churned, I was exhausted. An instinct urged me to buy a pregnancy test. When the faint pink line appeared, my heart stopped. Pregnant. I was carrying Dean's child. I laughed through tears, filled with a strange mix of terror and joy. This wasn't just a proposal anymore. It was the beginning of a family. Trembling, I picked up the phone to tell him the news. But when he answered, the room behind him pulsed with party noise. Music, laughter, voices. I told him I had news, but before I could say more, he interrupted me with excitement in his voice. Asterisk, you've got to hear about this amazing artist chick at the party. Asterisk. I froze. He sounded fascinated, curious, interested in this woman who had just walked into his home. I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time to tell him I was pregnant. So I muttered, "Don't do anything you'll regret," and hung up, unsettled but still hopeful. He told me to call back later with my news. Hours later, I did. But when someone answered, they told me Dean was busy. That sick feeling in my stomach hardened. I already knew what was happening. The next morning, I tried again. He finally picked up. I reminded him I had news to share, but instead he interrupted once more. His voice was flat, almost bored as he confessed. Asterisk, I need to tell you something. I cheated. With her. Last night. Asterisk. The words shredded through me like glass. I hung up the phone and ran to the bathroom, where my body betrayed me. I vomited, sobbing, the world spinning around me. He hadn't even asked what my news was. Later, when I called back shaking with rage, I forced myself to be steady, cold, matter of fact. That wasn't a mistake, I told him. Asterisk, that was a choice. I will never marry you. I'll only come back to take my things. Then I'm gone. Asterisk. What he didn't know was that my heartbreak was doubled. Within the same week, I miscarried the pregnancy. My first child. Gone before I could even tell him they existed. Alone, devastated, I grieved in silence for what might have been. And as I sat in that void, broken open by betrayal, loss, and disbelief, one thought darkened and grew in my mind. Heartbreak was only the beginning. A few weeks later, I had no choice. I had to go back to Alaska. My things had already been shipped there, and the only way forward was to collect them before leaving his life forever. It was right before Christmas, a time I should have been surrounded by family and warmth. Instead, I was flying into the bitter cold of Anchorage, clutching my heart like it was made of broken glass. When I landed, I clung to a tiny shred of hope that at least he would come to pick me up. After everything, after years of love, maybe he would show the smallest fragment of decency. But he didn't. He'd promised me the day before, but he either forgot or just didn't care enough anymore. And so I stood there alone, luggage at my feet, swallowed up by the blur of cheerful reunions around me. Families embracing, friends laughing, lovers running to one another's arms. An elderly couple noticed me, eyes red, lips trembling, body stiff with that heavy, lost girl look. They approached kindly, asking if I was okay. And with those simple words, my fragile composure collapsed. I broke, sobbing in the middle of the airport, shoulders shaking, cries I couldn't stop. Embarrassed, I waved the kind couple away, because even as I drowned in pain, my pride wouldn't allow me to take their comfort. I didn't want pity. Finally, I hailed a cab, and when I got to his house, I knocked until my knuckles burned and my fingertips went numb from the cold. The one to open the door wasn't him. It was his roommate, Bicycle Man. He let me in. Dean was still passed out in his bed, likely drunk from the night before. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty room around me, waiting. When he finally stirred the next morning, I didn't yell. I didn't argue. What was the point? He knew what he had done. He knew I knew. And if I screamed, if I cried in front of him, I'd only give him the satisfaction of labeling me the crazy ex. So I chose silence. Cold politeness. But that silence had a price. He misread it completely. He mistook it for indifference, maybe even permission to rewrite the story of us however he wanted. Because then came the cruelest twist yet. He introduced me to her. Yes, the very girl he'd cheated with. The girl whose existence had shattered our engagement and crushed me in ways he couldn't comprehend. But the real knife was the lie. To her, he introduced me not as his fiancé, not as a woman who had been flying out every 2 weeks to see him, not as a girl who had sacrificed her family and job to build a life with him, but as just some friend. That was it. A single erasing word, friend. As casually as you'd wave off a stranger. With that lie, it was as if I'd never existed at all. And I mustered every ounce of energy to stay silent, to stay composed. While inside me, my heart was a roaring fire of grief and rage, I outwardly became the image of calm. When people, mutual friends, his family, our circle, asked what was happening, I gave them nothing more than cold facts. Asterisk, yes, he's with her now. I'm just waiting for my boxes to arrive, then I'll be leaving. Asterisk, no screaming, no breakdowns. Just fact. My silence left them to connect the dots themselves. And they did. But silence had its limit. Every night, while I lay broken on that couch, he would bring her over. They stayed in his room, her giggles, their movements, all within earshot. He made no attempt to hide it. None. It was a cruelty so sharp it almost didn't feel real, like the kind of scene you see in a movie about the worst kind of boyfriend. Except this was my life. I remember lying awake, my hands clutched over my ears, thinking, asterisk, if I tell him this is cruel, will he even understand? Will he care? Asterisk, then came the crushing answer. No, because if he needed to be told, he wasn't capable of empathy to begin with. And yet, in the middle of this hell, kindness flickered in unexpected places. One night, Bicycle Man, the roommate, walked into the living room. He saw me curled up, silently crying. He didn't try to fix it. He just looked at me, his massive arms folded across his chest, and said in his deep voice, asterisk, Dan is an asshole. If I were you, I'd be crying too. Asterisk, it was the smallest comment, but it cracked the darkness with something like light. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't crazy. Someone else saw it. Someone else acknowledged how wrong it all was. But the heaviest secret? I still hadn't told anyone about the pregnancy or about losing it. I couldn't. Because I knew. if I said those words, if I admitted that part of my heartbreak, that fragile piece of me would be dismissed. They'd say I made it up to gain pity. They'd roll their eyes at the crazy, scorned woman. I refused to give them ammunition. And so I suffered in silence. I learned the craft of crying without sound. Tears streaming down my face into my pillow, each drop burning with grief, but my throat never releasing a noise. And as day after day he chose her, invited her, flaunted her in front of me as if I were invisible, my heartbreak quietly hardened into something else. A different kind of fire. The embers of revenge began to flicker to life. At some point, the tears stopped meaning anything. My body couldn't produce enough to match the ache inside. The heartbreak had saturated me so fully that eventually I was just hollow. It was like standing in the middle of a freezing river. At first the cold pierces your skin, makes you gasp, but the longer you stay in it, the more the pain numbs into something else. And in that numbness, a new thought crept in. If he was capable of doing this to me, cheating on me, humiliating me, erasing me in front of everyone, then maybe hurting him wasn't just fair. Maybe it was necessary. The idea of revenge didn't arrive as a lightning bolt. It dripped into me, slow, calculated. At first it was just a bitter whisper. Make him feel what you feel. Then it spiraled into possibilities. By the second week I was stranded in his house, enduring his smug audacity, his absolute disregard for even the scraps of humanity I once believed he had. Here was a man who had proposed to me, a man who had seen me plan a life with him, a man who had gotten down on one knee and held my tears in his hands as though they mattered. Now he brought another woman, his conquest, into the same walls we were supposed to share a future in, and did it under my nose. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to smear his name. His own actions were doing that better than I ever could. What I needed was precision. Something that would slice straight into the fragile ego he so desperately hid beneath charm and bravado. And the tool for that precision? Her. Thought. The girl. The new artist who had shown up one night, and unknowingly driven a wrecking ball straight through my life. The more I watched her, the more I noticed things, subtle things. The way she leaned in close when she laughed, her eyes lingering on both men and women. The way she picked up on attention like it was currency. She wasn't cruel, not like him. In fact, I suspected she didn't even know the truth about me being the fiancé. She was just caught up in his lies and charmed the same way I once was. That realization fueled me. Not because I hated her, but because she was the leverage. He had stolen my dignity in the cruelest of ways, and I would return the favor by taking her from him. Not dramatically, not by exposing him, but by choosing the most humiliating avenue possible. I am bisexual, a fact I had never flaunted, but one I could use in this razor-edged moment. And everything about her told me she was at least curious. Maybe more. That was my opening. So I planned it. Quietly. Patiently. Every party in that house blurred together after a while. Beer sticky counters, clouds of cigarette smoke, cheap Christmas lights tangled in knots along the walls. But one night stood out. I made sure of it. The night started like all the others. Music booming, people shouting over one another, the air suffocatingly thick with drunken bravado. But while Dean was occupied bragging and laughing with his buddies, I waited, watched, plotted. I found her before she was too drunk, still clear-eyed, giggling at some offhand joke, that flirtatious tilt in her posture unmistakable. I leaned in, a quiet predator cloaked in a smile. I guided her laughter in my direction. I let compliments drip from my mouth like honey. And before long, I had her alone. Yes, alone. With me. In his bedroom. The very space where he had erased me, where he had brought her to replace me, I decided to reclaim as my weapon. Behind that closed door, while the rest of the house drowned itself in alcohol, I seduced her. Smooth, deliberate, unhurried. And when it was done, when she lay there in the same bed she had thought was reserved for him, I told her. I told her everything. I told her who I really was. That I wasn't some friend he had thrown into the background. That I had been with him for years. That I had been engaged to him. That everything she thought she'd found so exciting was built on lies. I looked her straight in the eyes, my voice like ice, and said what I knew would haunt her. If he cared enough to propose to me, only to cheat with you days later. Just imagine how easily he'll discard you when someone else walks in. Asterisk. Her face drained of color. Her mouth opened to form words but shut again, the guilt drawing across her expression like a storm cloud. My disdain was calm, cold, factual, because that was more powerful than anger. She realized in that moment how profoundly she had been used, not just by him, but by his deception and arrogance. And just as I expected, that was when the door clicked open. Dian walked in. The scene he saw was not chaos, not violence, no screaming. Just the two of us, too calm, too still. He blinked, drunk and stupid, and for one moment, I could see the gears churning in his head. But he said nothing. Whether it was his ego, his intoxication, or just his blindness, he brushed past it like it wasn't happening. The party raged on outside, oblivious. She left shortly after, shaken. I could see it in her shoulders, the guilt weighing her down. And the next morning, Dian finally confronted me. His voice was sharp and suspicious, but beneath it, there was insecurity. Asterisk. What were you doing with her last night? Asterisk. I turned to him, my face a mask of indifference. And then I delivered the line, the strike designed to cut straight through him. Asterisk. She was just an easy piece of ass. Not surprising you managed to hook up with her the same night you met her. I just did the same thing you did. Asterisk. I didn't even believe those words about her. But they weren't for her. They were for him. A dagger plunged into his masculinity, into that fragile ego that needed to believe he was above everyone else. And I watched it happen. The look on his face as the insult landed. The way his confidence cracked. The horror in his eyes as if his very manhood shriveled inside him. He didn't roar, didn't fight, didn't even argue. He went silent. Completely silent. And in that silence, I smiled inside. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had flipped the balance of power. For the first time, I had made him feel small. And that was only the beginning. After that night, after those perfectly chosen words that slashed at him in ways fists never could, I finally shipped my things back to the Pacific Northwest. By then the mission was done. My dignity had been held. The poison planted. The seed of doubt and humiliation embedded into his chest like a parasite. I left Alaska. I left the cold, the humiliation, the house that smelled of beer and betrayal. I left him. And then silence. For 5 long years, I heard nothing. Life carried me forward. I healed slowly. I married someone else. And 1 week after learning I was pregnant with my first child, in 2005, I opened my email to see his name. The ghost from my past, Dian. His message was syrupy, casual, the kind of desperate olive branch someone throws when they're drowning. He said he wanted to catch up. Against my better judgment, I answered. I wasn't afraid anymore. Time had weathered me into steel, and I thought, maybe this was my chance. My little moment to gloat. We got on the phone. His voice had changed, older, shakier, but beneath it still lurked that pathetic blend of arrogance and self-pity. I braced myself for excuses, manipulation, some fake apology. But what he gave me instead was better than anything I could have scripted. Because karma had already buried him. He spilled it all, without me asking, as though confessing might lighten the curses weighing him down. He told me that after I left, everything fell apart. His words came tumbling, bitter, almost pitiful. First, Choti, the girl he'd traded me for, cheated on him. Not just with anyone, but with his best friend. Within 2 weeks of me leaving, she had moved in with that man. And Dian? He was left in the dust, stunned, betrayed, discarded the same way he had discarded me. Irony in motion. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Christmas Eve rolled around and his boss fired him. Why? Because his mistake, with me, had traveled through the grapevine. And that grapevine reached his employer, a mutual friend. And that friend decided he didn't want Dian, the cheater and liar, working in his store anymore. So on the very night normal families exchanged gifts, Dian got handed his severance instead. If you thought it couldn't spiral worse, it did. His truck broke down in front of an electrical station. Because he had no job, he had no money to fix it, which meant it was impounded. Gone. In Alaska. In the middle of winter. And then the wind grew colder. His family, disgusted by what they had heard about his actions toward me, cut him off completely. They disowned him. Just like that, the family man who once bragged about loyalty and friendship was alone. So what was left? Friends. Not for long. Because after Thot betrayed him, his remaining friends, his last fragile tether to any kind of community, turned on him too. One night, they got him blackout drunk, then beat him bloody, dragged his limp body outside, and left him half-buried in a snow berm. His own so-called ride-or-die crew literally threw him out into the freezing night. Run out of his house, his circle, his life. By then, all he had was exile. He fled Alaska, broken, shunned, penniless. Eventually, he settled in Texas, alone, deserted, nursing the wounds of every burned bridge behind him. And now, in the voice quivering over my phone line, he admitted it. Whatever you did to me, it planted something. Like a cancer. You didn't go crazy like most people would've. You stayed calm. But it destroyed everything after you left. I've been paying for it ever since. I didn't even need to gloat. He was already doing it for me. Already laying his crumbled life at my feet, as though I had orchestrated the whole symphony of destruction. But I wasn't done. I had held one last truth locked inside me for years, and now, with his heart already bleeding out, I decided it was finally time to open it. I told him about the baby. The silence on his end was crushing. Then, like a dam breaking, the sobs came. Ugly, guttural, unrestrained sobs. He cried like a man whose last defenses had collapsed. He said over and over again, I didn't know. I had no idea. And finally, I let the anger inside melt into clarity. My voice was calm, decisive, matter of fact. Of course you didn't know. Because when I tried to tell you, confessing your own disgusting choices was more important than listening. We had unprotected sex. It was never impossible I could be pregnant. But you didn't care to ask. You didn't care to know. He wept openly on the line, stammered through apologies, begged for forgiveness like it would change the past. But it was too late. I told him the truth, not with rage, not with fire, but with the kind of emotional detachment born from survival. I don't hate you. Things are better now. I'm married. I'm expecting my first child. My life is good. He never called again. And that was the end of DN. Not with a slam, not with a scream, but with the quiet crumble of a man whose ego had finally been devoured by consequences. Looking back, our relationship was never real love. It was his empty charm, inflated promises, and my naive hope spun together into something fragile and false. I wasted too many years asking myself why I deserved such betrayal, when the truth was simple. He didn't cheat because of me. He cheated because the only person DN ever cared about was DN. Now, when I revisit it in memory, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel relief. Because I escaped before I was trapped for life with someone incapable of empathy, of remorse, of genuine love. I learned that true revenge isn't always fire and fury. It's staying grounded, remaining graceful, and planting seeds of doubt that grow like vines into the cracks of a liar's life. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is silence. And perhaps most powerful of all, I watched karma do the rest. 5 years after he shattered me, I had moved on, married, and prepared to welcome life into my body again. Meanwhile, he had nothing left but his regrets, shunned in every way a man can be shunned. His tears fell heavy, his apologies emptied into the void, and I heard them land like water on stone. And in my mind, those tears ran onto the grave of the baby I had lost, watering the flowers I would never lay with my child. My redemption wasn't just revenge. It was knowing he grieved too late for something he threw away without ever realizing. And that was enough. ### resolution and reflection. So what did I learn? That betrayal slices the heart sharper than any blade, but composure slices deeper in return. I learned that lies eat their liars alive, even without your hand guiding it. Sometimes revenge isn't about planning the explosion. It's about planting the spark and watching karma burn down the house you walked away from. In the end, he cried enough tears to flood the past. But I walked forward into the future. Free. ### closing CTA. If you listened this far, thank you for sitting with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and the sweetest revenge. If you've ever been cheated on, if you've ever had someone underestimate you, remember, karma doesn't need your rage to be effective. Sometimes your silence is the deadliest weapon of all. Don't forget to like this video if you felt the sting of justice here, and subscribe for more stories that prove one simple truth. Betrayals may scar us, but they also carve the path to our triumph.